Shalom. Thank you so much, Lee. So my name is Chris Pouney, and I'm delighted to be here representing ACTE today, the Association of Corporate Travel Executives, who are delighted and thrilled to partner with ITMF on the global stage. My role, I work with ACTE extensively to help grow their brand and help partner with events such as this. So I'm absolutely delighted to be here in Tel Aviv to do this today with a short presentation. I was also really excited, by the way, to learn that this is the venue for the Eurovision Song Contest in 2019. So as a really big fan, and what I would say as somebody that lives out of the United Kingdom, I hope that my presentation here is received far better than our entry to next year's Eurovision Song Contest will be. So I don't know whether we're doing a review and scoring and things, but 12 points, please, would make me very happy. So delighted to be here. So it's really important in every market to have a look and share ideas and come together and understand from your fellow peers what's happening in other organizations in Israel, and that's really important. It's also very critical that we take a look externally. We look at the wider global market and have a look at some of the trends and activities that are happening. And that's really where ACTE comes in. So ACTE is an organization of many thousands of members operating in 60 plus countries across the world. So what I'm going to share with you over the next 18 minutes and 39 seconds is an overview of what's happening globally, so we can start to have a think about what that means here in Israel. And something I would point out, and I point this out in a number of markets I work in, just because something's happening globally, and globally sometimes naturally we look at what's happening in America, doesn't necessarily mean, of course, that this market and other markets have to go through the same steps. In economic circles, we talk a lot about leapfrogging. So of course you can go straight to the end point. You can modernize your operations and go straight to what's happening in America today. But actually what's more exciting, I always think, is what's the next big thing. And I look at Israel, I look around the room, I look around the market and the country, and I see a very young, economically active, technology savvy country and market. And what I would say to all of you is be brave and be bold in terms of what you're doing, and have a look at not what travel management's doing now, but have a look at what it's doing in the future. What are the next big steps? Because it's not written in stone that the next big innovations have to be created in Western Europe or created in America. They can absolutely be created here as well. And a lot of that innovation in other markets is happening here in Israel today. So let's talk about the modern business traveler. Let's talk about what's happening in the wider industry. And you see the word risk flying in there for very good reason. We'll come on to that in a second. And when we talk about the work that ACTE do, if we'd looked at this a couple of years ago, we would have talked about how ACTE operate in the intersection between buyer and supplier. So at events all across the globe, we bring together buyers and suppliers, buyers and corporations and suppliers to talk about what they're doing and share best practice. But there's a third dimension that was being missed, and that was the traveler. And it's increasingly important that we bring the traveler on the journey with us. It's increasingly important that we deliver travel programs and travel solutions that work well with our travelers, because in most markets today, the economy is doing well, and actually organizations talk about not even recruiting personnel, recruiting staff, they talk about attracting staff. We need to attract people to work in our organization. And if we are amazingly forward-thinking and technological, but when it comes to our travel program, we don't trust people, and we have to fill in forms, and we have to phone somebody up, and it's not kind of consistent with the organization we want to be, that is causing people to go and join other organizations right now. So a lot of the work that ACTE are seeing globally is around the traveler journey, traveler centricity. What does life look like if you're a traveler? I used to be a travel manager for many years, and I can tell you I now do a lot of travel, and things look very different when you're a traveler. When you're standing at a baggage carousel at 4 o'clock in the morning and you have to wait 2 hours for your bag somewhere, not here in Tel Aviv obviously, but in other places, life looks very different. And guess what? When we're travel managers, we often don't have the experiences that our travelers have, right? Because when we're travel managers, we often have a little star next to our name, and we get some wonderful experiences, and that's great, that's lovely, but actually we're not seeing it as our travelers are seeing it. So it's really important that we consider how our people are traveling. So a big part of what ACTE does is around insight, is around awareness of trends, looking at solutions. But the key message here is it's what works best for you. What's going to work in your organization might not work in yours. There's many different factors which influence. Most of them are around economics and geography. So if you're working in the oil sector, working out of Dubai right now, your attitude to travel is going to be very different than if you're working in the tech sector based in San Francisco, okay? So the ability for you to retain, recruit staff is all going to play a part in the way you structure your travel program. So there is no one size fits all. This is it's complex stuff. I get to spend lots of time with lots of travel managers across the globe, and people kind of moan and say, oh, it's so difficult, I don't know what to do, and I wish life was so much easier. Actually, I don't wish it was easier. Travel is complicated, and that's why we're all here. And if it wasn't complicated, we wouldn't be here, and I think that's a good thing, and we should celebrate that. So let's have a think about some of the other work that ACTE does. So ACTE acts as a voice piece within the industry as a whole. So hopefully some of you would have seen some of the global initiatives and some of the global messages and conversations that ACTE's been involved in. There's a lot of big stuff happening in the world right now from a macroeconomic perspective, which could have a massive impact upon travel. In my world, Brexit, as I'm sure you can imagine, is a big conversation in the UK and in Western Europe. But globally, we look at what's happening in North America. We look at the rise and fall of airlines and the consolidation within industry. There's lots of things happening which will have an active part, and ACTE are there to help us make sense of that stuff. Disruption is a big part of it. We're seeing a lot of new suppliers, a lot of new ways of thinking. Goodness, 10 years ago, the likes of Uber, the likes of Airbnb, apartment providers, Fairfly and Yapta, and a lot of organizations doing lots of really funky and interesting stuff within the travel space. So there's lots of disruptors come at us. There's lots of opportunities for us as buyers to take a broader view on how we manage travel. And again, ACTE is part of helping drive that discussion. But there is a dilemma in travel. And I come from a procurement background, and procurement are often accused of only having a view on savings. And savings, it could be argued, has a direct impact on the traveller, right? So the traveller has a need, and we have a need to drive savings. So again, the message is we need to find the balance within your organisation. And actually, every organisation is different. We need to find where that pendulum sits within your organisation. There might be a perfectly good reason why somebody needs to travel in business class, needs to stay in a better hotel, etc. Can't book 21 days out. We need to think about it from a traveller perspective and drive sensible processes. So ACTE is incredibly good. We're incredibly good at launching white papers, and I would prompt all of you, after you've scored me 12 points, of course, go onto the ACTE website and go and download some of the great white papers and the great insight that's produced. One of them is a series, it's been running for 3 years now, around the modern business traveller. So what does the modern business traveller look like? What are their needs and wants, and how can we adapt our travel program? And this was a piece of work which was done across the globe, and Israel featured heavily in the research and in the insight to this. And we see some interesting points. We see that, the modern business traveller has much more complex needs and wants. We don't fit neatly into a box anymore. It's not about flying somewhere, staying in a hotel for 2 days, and coming out again. We have so much more needs than that. We might stay on. We might do some personal travel on the front of the trip or the back of the trip. We want more flexibility. We might be entitled to go economy, but there's a perfectly good reason why we need to be in business. We're going straight into a meeting. We need a shower at the airport. I had somebody recently who said, look, I have young children. I have to creep out of the house at 4 o'clock in the morning, and therefore I need to have a shower at the airport. I can't have a shower in the house. I'm going to wake my entire family up. It was $50 extra. Is that a reasonable request? I think it probably is, actually. So, people don't fit neatly into these boxes anymore. People want that flexibility. People are demanding this on-demand consumer experience. I've got to have a play with this, by the way. There we go. Look at that. I think that's fantastic. Thank you. I've never seen that before. This on-demand consumer experience, I see this more and more, that within our travel programs, we provide technology that's clunky, that's slow, that doesn't always give that consumer experience. And our travelers are saying, well, look, if I'm going to book a car or book a hotel for personal use, this is the benchmark. These are the tools that I use. So I expect the technology I'm given at work to be at least as good as what you're giving me, as what I have available to me in the consumer world. And if it's not, we can't then be surprised that people go off program and book their own stuff. So that should absolutely be the benchmark. Travelers are saying that's the level of technology that I want, and we want our travel programs and our travel policies to support that. So our role as a travel manager through this paper here is around saying, think like a traveler, and say, if you were traveling, what would you expect? What would your expectations be? And we should be pushing our suppliers to deliver at that level. And then we bring the risk piece in. So when people do want to be flexible, when people do want to stay for a few days after the business trip and do some leisure activity, there's a risk to that. When people want to stay in an Airbnb instead of in a hotel, there is a perceived risk to that. How do we manage those risks? How do we manage them as travelers? Is it enough for us to just say, no, you can't do that? I'm not seeing too many companies right now who are saying no, because guess what? In certain industries and certain geographies, the economic cycle is such that we need to work hard to retain those people in our companies. So we can't really say no. We need to find a way of making it happen efficiently, and that's certainly something which ACTE have spotted through this research. Content is really important, the ability to have everything in one place. If I want to book a lounge access, I want to book a car park, I want it all in one place for my travel experience. And 38% of respondents said that actually we suffer with that limited content. It's not just things like car park, actually it's some hotels or some different types of airline rate, or maybe pre-booking baggage on an aircraft. We want to see that content all in one program. 20% think we should just have more channels, but 47% think more channels would weaken their program. So a lot of contradictory information that's coming out of this research as well that we need to make sense on. Mobile apps are really important. I've met a number of organizations who insist on having mobile apps, and one of the terminologies we saw was around having having mobile supported and a mobile first policy. I'm now seeing organizations have a mobile only policy. So we're not even going to give you a desktop site to book things. It's just all on your phone, right? Why, who works off a desktop anymore? If it's good enough on your phone, we should just have that. Interesting idea, interesting concept. But a lot of organizations still work with travel bookers. They still have the information going to a travel booker that makes a booking. There's nothing wrong with that, but apps are designed really for the travelers themselves to make bookings, to interact with travel. So again, we need to kind of think about the different moving parts that are going on here. Excuse me. And then we think about leisure. I'm not sure I like this term, so the combination of business and leisure travel. And it's a thing. Anybody in the room been asked for this or aware of this within their organizations? People combining personal trips onto leisure trips. So there's a few, perhaps not many. The question I would ask, for those of you that don't think it's happening, have a closer look, because I would imagine a lot of people are doing it. Something I do myself actually quite regularly. Probably not the average business traveler, if I'm honest, but this is something that's happening, and it used to be the reserve of the younger travelers. So in 2016, when ACTE did this research, 69% of travelers between 20 and 30 did this, wanted to do this. But actually, in 2017, last year, it was actually 37% of older travelers doing this. So this is not just a reserve of younger travelers. This is people my age as well, because I fit into the second one, by the way, not the first one. So this is older people looking at doing this as well. Why wouldn't you? Now, why do we care about it? Well, actually, if somebody's staying on, what does that do to your insurance policy? So if someone's staying on for 2 days, what does that do to your insurance policy? I was with a client recently who said they've built into their travel insurance policy that people can stay on for up to a week, as long as they're not, visiting the States and deciding to go to Argentina. As long as they're in the same country, then it's actually fine. And again, the question I would ask you, the modern business traveler wants to do this, so have a look within your own programs. Are people doing it today and you just don't know about it? I would suggest in a number of instances they probably are. Likewise, we see people asking to lodge with colleagues. So I want to share a room. There's 4 or 5 of us on a project. Why don't we get an apartment? Why don't we get an Airbnb? This is happening more and more, and actually makes a lot of sense from an experience perspective, but also can drive down costs within your organizations. But again, there's a risk around that. How do you manage that? Do you have just the same sex in one apartment? How do you manage it? There's lots of questions which you need to consider. So there's risk all over it. And then we look at the physical risk and the big ticket items, the terrorism stuff, and this stuff is unfortunately not going away. But what I would suggest is we focus a lot of our energy on the major risk items that can unfortunately happen and do happen within the globe today. But what about the more mundane stuff? What about road traffic accidents? What about someone slipping in the shower or forgetting to take their medication with them? How does your travel process with that? In terms of road traffic accidents, this is something that I'm personally very interested in because it's such a big risk. And they do say that the biggest thing we can ever do in life, the biggest risk we can ever do, is jump in a car. And I saw a great statistic from the World Health Organization that said for every 100,000 cars on the road, we look at Nigeria, there's over 1,000 deaths, whereas in the UK that number is 7. Okay, so there's still a risk if you travel to the UK, but the risk is significantly larger. So think about that. 1 in every 100 cars in Nigeria has been involved in a fatal road accident. That's a staggering statistic. And again, I'm not an expert, but I'd imagine for every fatal road accident, there's probably 10 that are non-fatal, right? And so from a traveler perspective, have you covered this? Do your travelers know what to do were something to happen? Right? So again, we can talk about the big ticket items, but we need to think about the more mundane things as well that are much more likely to happen. So we're seeing travel policies becoming a lot more prevalent with regards to safety, a lot stricter policies with regards to safety, a lot more you must do this. And actually things like non-traditional accommodations, so this is things like apartments, things like Airbnb, featured in just 22% of travel policies of the respondents, so a pretty small number. Whereas non-traditional ground transport, which we're pretty much talking about Uber, I think, 56%, so a much greater number of you have addressed things like Uber. And by the way, that's not to say that your policy allows it. You addressing it might have said, we just don't allow it, you must not do this. That's fine as well. But the question is actually, you need to address it. And things like safety checks at hotels, very common if you work in the energy sector, that your check-in process in a hotel. Does anybody work in energy or oil or any oil companies in here? No? Okay. Well, if you do, and you're a traveler checking into a hotel, your experience checking into that hotel is likely to be similar to getting on an aircraft. You'll be given a safety briefing. You'll be sat down and given a safety briefing at that hotel, because that's how seriously oil and energy companies take this safety security. Likewise, in cars, the driver will not be allowed to drive off if you're not wearing a seatbelt, because again, they've recognized that's a massive risk for them as an organization. So again, the message we're getting from this is modern business travel has risk in many, many different areas. So what can you do? Travel is incredibly complex. Simplifying travel is another piece of work which was done by ACTE. There's another white paper around simplifying travel, and I would ask you to have a look at that, because actually getting this stuff simplified in the eyes of a traveler is really, really important. And if we look at the priorities, we saw in this second piece of paper, the second work, was that things like cost reduction, data security, duty of care, really high priorities for travel managers going forward. However, there was 2 things in here: traveler satisfaction and simplifying the travel program. Really, really high priorities for travelers. And I would suggest that actually a couple of years ago, these did not feature at all in the priorities of travel managers, but they do now. So getting the traveler satisfaction high, because if we don't get satisfied travelers, they're not going to be happy employees. They might look elsewhere for work. They might simply go off program. They might book somewhere else where they are going to get satisfaction in terms of how we're booking it. So, and actually, if we provide a simplified travel program, we can improve duty of care. Travelers are more likely to use what it is we're offering, and that in turn will drive down costs. I mentioned around the shared apartment experience. That's an example. That drives down cost, and it drives up satisfaction, typically, of travelers. So if people want to do something, then you should be working to deliver against that. And then the last couple of slides really talk about what we're doing. What are we doing today within travel programs, or things like KPIs? We want to look at safety and satisfaction within our travel programs. It's no longer enough to measure our travel management company on how quickly they answer the phone, right? There's much more to it than that. How happy are our people? Let's go sit down with our travelers, find out what's happening in their world, ask them about their experiences. In larger companies, you need to do that in a more automated way. In a smaller company, you just need to drink a lot of coffee coffee. And goodness, tasting what the coffee's like in this part of the world, it's an amazing thing. So greater balance between savings and service, a holistic look at how travel works. How are your company goals? So what is your goals of a company? Because I often say, travel managers will talk to me and say, Chris, our company goals are to save 20%. No, they're not. It's like, no company ever says our goal is to save 20% in travel, right? Company goals are around driving productivity, improving retention, improving the bottom line, all of those kind of broad things. It's just that we often interpret those to mean we have to save 20% in our travel program. And by the way, it's possible to spend 20% more on your travel program and help the bottom line of the organization a heck of a lot more. I'm not suggesting the argument needs a little bit more rounding out before you take that to your CFO, by the way. And then when we think about travel policy, the big change in travel policy is they're a lot shorter. So globally, we're seeing people ripping up their 20, 30-page policies, which talk about you must not do this, you must do that. And they now talk about people need to spend money like it's their own. Really difficult kind of concept for us to get our head around. Spend money like it's your own. So they're shorter, they're more guideline-based. They recognize work-life balance. They recognize that travel is about taking people away from their homes, away from their families. And by the way, when you go speak to people and say, what do you need to make your traveling life a bit easier? In my experience, people don't always just say, I need to travel first class, I need to stay at the Four Seasons. There's actually a lot more deeper stuff that you'll get involved in. I want better connectivity. It would be really nice to know who else is going to be traveling at the same time so I can, touch base with someone. Traveling is a really lonely business, is something we hear a lot. So work-life balance is really important. We're seeing a lot of companies move from what I would say is a command and control policy through to this kind of more open guidelines. It's a massive theme that's happening. And we need to take care of travelers. And the reason we're doing this is ultimately there is a line of sight. Organizations globally are recognizing that travel has a massive part to play in recruitment, retention, and the morale of travelers. So on that note, I would like to conclude. Delighted to be here. Thank you so much for your attention, and I look forward to speaking with a lot of you during the course of the day. Thank you very much.